Good morning, everybody. This is the webinar on expenses and ledger, and we'll be going through expenses and ledger in terms of the going and using the typical interface for the day, the configuration, and then reports. So let's just start with how to get there. From your main screen, and let me make sure you're looking at my screen, you will click on expenses and ledger, and you'll notice a couple of icons that might be different than what you're used to, but I'm going to go from scratch left to right. And I think I'm in the wrong school. Let me just change my schools. I've got a couple of different schools in this database. Okay, so here are my existing suppliers. We'll call them vendors. The idea behind a vendor is anytime I cut a check for a particular type of thing, it's easier to keep track of it if, for instance, all my Pacific Gas and Electric checks, if I make a Pacific Gas and Electric vendor, I can see easily what has happened in the past. So that's the notion of a vendor. We're going to go through these icons. The way that you add people is very similar to family data and family accounting, so I won't go through every detail on that, but basically this is the icon for adding a vendor. Editing a vendor, meaning changing some information once it's in there. Removing a vendor, which you would rarely do unless you had just made a mistake, in which case removing a vendor is appropriate. The contacts screen in this would be people who are associated with that vendor. The writing of the check would be under check calculation. Setting up something that's really useful, I think, is standard accounts. We'll absolutely be going through all of this. And then these you've seen before. The tracking items for a vendor, user-defined fields, a log sheet for notes, a document folder for storing PDFs, a mail merge, and this is a different icon. This is general ledger to be able to make journal entries and basically, it's for journal entries. Okay, so let's just start by adding a new vendor. And all of these icons, by the way, are also the same as if you went down here, and you can also use the hotkeys. This is similar to all of our other modules. So let me add a new vendor, and let's say this vendor's name is Visiting Balloon Show. And they make balloons for the kids and all kinds of animals. Okay, balloon show, I'll call it. If you don't have multiple regions, we're just going to have it available to the current school. Those of you who have multiple schools, you can actually take a check and make it out to the expense part for different schools at the same time. I'll do that. I'll show you how that is on the phone company one, but we're just going to do this as a single school. The account number, this isn't mandatory. This is whatever their account number is with you. Tax ID number would be handy if this person were to get a 1099 at the end of the year, and you can flag them through tracking as 1099, and I'll touch on that. This would be simply their address, city, state, zip, you can put in, and the contact numbers. This is the same as all of our other screens in terms of adding somebody, so I won't spend a lot of time on here. The comment and alert could be quite useful to you, which would be, let's say the alert is they've given you some bad invoices in the past. Okay, so we're always going to check the invoices before paying. I'm going to save that and exit. So right now I just have the new vendor here with no contact information and no tracking. So I'm going to just continue going through the boxes across. If I wanted to change something, again, I'd go to edit. So I could put a little bit more info in if I wanted to. save and continue. I don't want to remove the vendor, but I do want to add contacts, and this would be the name of whoever works on behalf of them. And I could type a new person in here and click on Add Contact to add new. Let's pretend it's one of the people in your families, and I'll say Add Existing Person, and I'll pick see if I have a Bundy coming up. And let's say Al Bundy is going to stop selling shoes and he will start selling balloons, okay? So basically I just add him in as a contact. So now I've got an easy number to call and I've got the vendor. Again, going across because it's most methodical, we're going to hold off on cutting the check, and here's something that's very useful, which is standard accounts. If I didn't have a standard account, every time I'd go to write a check, it would come up blank. I wouldn't know what checkbook it came out of or what expense account. And to me, I've got more of a possibility of making an error. I'd like to eliminate that. So I'm going to go to standard accounts, and I'm going to say whenever I pay the balloon show, the traveling show, I am going to write the check out of my checking account. And I also know it's going to go towards some type of an account, some type of an expense account that I did, and I did a 5201 beforehand, and I'll show you how to add those in configuration. So 5201 balloon events, and maybe I know that that's $45 a pop. Pardon the pun. Okay, $45. So click on Save, Exit. I basically have this vendor set up. That's all it took. I could also double-click here on tracking, and if somehow they were to be considered one of these 1099 groups, you know, I use them so often they were over, I don't know if it's $900 a year or something like that. I could flag them as non-employee compensation. And for those of you who use the W-2 1099 program from Procare, at the end of the year you can pull the vendors by this, and it will know where to put those expenses in terms of which box. I also can flag for all of my vendors. I could make up a list like this, and this is simply a tracking item. There's nothing special about vendor tracking. And in the list I could say, this particular person always gets paid on the 15th. I doubt you do a net discount. Another person might get paid on the 1st. And so let's say I save that item. I've got my tracking done. I could use user-defined fields, log sheets, and so on. That's straightforward, and we'll be covering this one towards the end here. So the tracking one, the reason that that's nice is as I look at my vendors, if I had a lot of vendors and I'm a large center, I could click on Select Filter, and here in my vendor tracking items, I could just say, you know what, I just want to look, today's the 25th, I'm going to look at everybody who was due the 15th. A little bit late, but let's exit. So I could count them here. I've got 2 vendors, I click OK, I click Exit. Now I've got an easy way to just focus on those particular vendors, and that's using the tracking. I can go back to my default filter and continue from here. So if I've never cut a check before, let's say it is to the balloon show, I've got all the information entered, they're ready to go. I'm going to click on the check calculation. Because I've optioned to automatically import that configuration, I can not have to do very much. I could just post the check. What happens here is the post date is today's date. If I go to print it, it's today's. For the particular checking account, in this case I'm using a primary checking account, Procare keeps track of the last check number printed and increments it. So if I wanted to do this and I post it, basically $45 comes out of my checking account, $45 goes and gets expensed, and and you could either print or not print the check. So options. I can print the check, post it and print it, in which case piece of paper comes out and hopefully you loaded the check stock and life is good. I could also reprint it, by the way. I can post and print later, and this is handy for, that's what I'll select here. So posting, out comes a piece of paper, it's closed, the check calculation screen is done, you've got the check, everything's done and recorded. If I have a pile of checks and I want to print all of my checks at one time, I can select post and print later, and that'll put it in a buffer, and that's what I'm going to do with this check. If I had handwritten the check, or I simply was recording some type of event, it was a credit card or debit card purchase, and we'll hit those soon, I could just post it. There's my standard accounts. The import is to import the values from standard accounts. That's if I chose not to automatically import it, and I did. And if I'm filling out this check from scratch and I can't remember what account balloon events is, I can click on chart of accounts and get a full set listing of all of my chart of accounts, and then hunt through my revenue account and figure out which account I want to use. That's the chart of accounts. So in this case, I'm just going to post and print later so you can see that option. The check goes away. You're sitting at the next one. If I wanted to see that check, I could click up here, and you'll notice the check number now is not assigned because I haven't printed it. Who knows where it's going to be in the order when I do print out all of my checks. Post dates here, due dates here. The print date is not yet done. It won't be done until we go and do the next step. So let's exit out of here. So if I had done this for a number of vendors, the very next time I go in and I want to print all those checks out, I would go up here to Functions, Batch Print Checks, and you can also hit Control F8. As many checks as I said to post later would show up here. I could change the starting check number if I wanted to. I can't edit this amount from here, but if I wanted to change this, I could go back to the check and do that. I'd flag it, and again, I can print the check. I can prompt after each check, are you sure this printed? I can uncheck that, and it'll only give me the prompt after the whole pile, in this case just one, but if I had 5 of them, they'd all have to print. And I have the option, if I had, let's say, handwritten the check somehow in between then and now, or said post and print later when this was really just a post, I could select complete posting the check number, don't print. So again, if I want a piece of paper to come out, I'm just going to click on print checks, and out it goes to my printer. And here's the confirmation, because I didn't say after each check. It says, did all of the checks print? Yes. And I'm done. So the key here to me is a lot of these standard accounts, and particularly of use to standard accounts for those of you who have anything like a tax deposit or anything that's got multiple pieces. It's really good, because then you can do something like this. If you're doing a tax deposit, I don't know how many of you do, part of what you're doing is you're eliminating a liability somewhat, and so you may have a couple of different liability accounts. Let's see, Social Security, let's do Medicare, let's just do Social Security and Medicare if you do have payroll. If you don't, just extrapolate from this, it's the same notion. And I want Social Security, and I'll go through what this is, Medicare. Medicare. So part of the problem with this is some of these things you're reducing a liability. I'm just making random numbers up. Your numbers are going to be anything like this. I can make that 200. You know, this will be 6.2 and this will be 1 point something. And then your matching piece. And you'll notice as I put the numbers in, the balance keeps going up, and I'll explain what this notion is with reducing a liability. And we'll do 200. Okay. You'll normally have even more lines on a tax deposit. If any of you are interested in tax deposit, go to procaresupport.com and type in the word tax deposit, and there's a real good example there. The reason I bring this example up is you'll notice this is a minus 1,000, this is a minus 200, this is a plus 1,000, this is a plus 200, and the check comes out to be the total. What that's about is I'm writing the check, and I don't have to worry about debits and credits. All I have to know is I'm writing this check in order to reduce a liability I have, reduce another liability I have, increase an expense I have, and increase an expense. And if I select this as automatic import, I don't have to remember this every time I go to do my tax deposit example. Okay. Let's see what else we've got through here. You can also void a check. Let's go back to our balloon company. So when we're on this screen, I've got a quick view of not every check done, but a buffer of the most recent. And here's the check I just did today. And let's say I wanted to void it. I would go back to my check writing. This would be the check I haven't posted. Up here, I'm going to scroll up just by one. And here I could void the check. I can also reprint a check, and I can also edit it. The editing would be more on the order of the example I gave when I go to print it and I say, nope, this is $50. Well, I'd have to come over here. I'd say edit. I'd say 50. And I'd save it. So this check actually, we did post it, and we used up this check number. So I could edit it again, change the check number, and print the check out. But that's basically these buttons. The up and the down arrows on any of these screens are to march up and down within the same form. So we're in the check calculation screen, and we can march up and down to all the different vendors. Okay. If anybody did have multiple sites, I think I've got the AT&T phone company, and if you wrote a check out to them, I could say, you know what, every time I write one of these checks, a portion is going to go to school 1 and a portion comes out of school 2 expenses. That's basically what that school indicator is for. All right, that's all the checks on the screen. And the last icon here is journal entries. You would use a journal entry, in my eyes, anytime you have a pretty unusual event or you have a correcting event. You don't use a journal entry to correct what somebody owes you in family accounting. That's done from within family accounting. But for instance, you might make a journal entry for some type of a donation. Okay, somebody hands you a donation, and you don't get donations often enough to have done this through a donation family or any of that. You just want to make a journal entry. You click on General Journal. You can make more categories here. And I've already have a category called Donations and Grants. And I'll show you where you make more of these categories. They're basically boxes. What you call it doesn't matter. It's just so that I can find all of my donation and grants entries later on. I'm going to click on New Entry. The comment would be, let's say it was from Smith Family. The Smith Family Foundation wrote me a check for $1,000. Because I'm not doing this through a ledger, I'm going to have to enter both sides of the entry. But you really don't need to know debits and credits. All you need to know is intuitively what you're doing. Well, for this school, if somebody gives me $1,000, I know that I have to put it somewhere, and I'm going to put this into the primary checking account directly. When I make a journal entry, it will not flow through deposit reports. I'm just saying bank account goes up by 1,000. I don't have to worry about debits and credits. Okay, I'm just going to tab over. And what's the corresponding thing that had to happen? If I get $1,000 in, something has to go up, either equity or revenue. And so that's a revenue account. And I've made one, hopefully. 4,000s are typically revenues. And here's one, grants, donations, and fundraisers. 10,000. Or 1,000, okay? Debits equal credits, I can post this. If you get something wrong in here, I don't know what you could do wrong in this example, but sometimes they're more confusing. Maybe you did a minus 1,000 in here. It's not going to let you post it because it's an unbalanced entry. So again, you could approach this the accounting way and know what's to be a debit, what's to be a credit. You can't put it in these boxes anyway, but you can check with this. But if you do intuitively what this is, you can just post it. Again, if you forget what the chart of accounts is, you can click on that and get a blow up of the chart of accounts. Basically post and exit. If you wanted to modify this one later on, you could double click on it and change it. I personally would not, unless it's the same day or something like that, because 4 years from now, you're not going to want to know what it is. You're not going to know what it is. You're going to want to know what it is, but you won't. What would be nicer is if I entered the reversing transaction, if it was a different day, realize that this is going to be your paper trail on what you did. So don't do transactions that you'll wonder what they were in 5 years. Again, I can void the entries. If I would do a void, for instance, if it was something that had been on the books for a while and then I wanted to come back to it. That's pretty much writing the check, entering a vendor. It's pretty straightforward. The remaining thing you'll probably do with the interface for expenses in Ledger is reconciling a bank account. You're going to have multiple bank accounts, and for any one of them, if you want to reconcile, you'll go through the following. I am going to double back here, by the way, and discuss the credit card notion. If you use a credit card or a debit card, we'll go through that. Let's go right now to do the functions, reconcile bank accounts. Reconciling a bank account does nothing to change the balance I have on my books. People get that confused a fair amount. Basically, I write a check today and out it goes. Whether it appears on a bank statement or not, it's not on my books. I'm sorry, it is on my books. Whether the bank says they receive it or not doesn't matter. That check still went out. So basically, reconciling is a way for you to see what the bank says happened during a period of time, and then you can confirm if that's what you have. So if you missed something, you'll see it on the bank statement, and you're going to come back out of it, add it. Maybe it'll be a journal entry or some debit card you had done or something you had done that you didn't have recorded in Procare. Or it's something you have and the bank has got it recorded wrong, in which case you'd contact the bank. That's the purpose of reconciling. So let's say we're reconciling we just got our statement and it has to do with the statement date as of 9/1 for the prior month, for August. This is not my beginning and ending balance that I have in Procare. I am reconciling the bank statement. So in my bank statement, I started out with $10,000 and I ended up with 908.73. Okay. Now, if they had fees, you could put them in here. And I just said reconciling does not affect any book balance. If you were to put a fee in here, it does, because now you're creating a journal entry. I've done a journal entry ahead of time for the bank fees, and we'll do it that way. You could do them up front and put them in here, in which case it creates a journal entry in Procare. But here's my beginning and ending. I'm going to go click Next. I could view things just by date, or I'm putting it on all unreconciled items. You'll see here's my difference, 908.73 right now. I do have an option to import statements, and maybe Doug can put a link to that if he's watching the chat box. This is if the bank statement is in certain formats, you can import the statement. I'm going to click on it just so you can see where you would go, and it would open up a screen where you could point it to wherever your bank file is. And then as long as it was in a format similar to this, it would bring it into a screen so that you can flag it as reconcile. That's just import statement. I'm not going to go through that. Most people don't. So I've got all of my different types of transactions, and let's say I want to flag all the deposits that happened in August because that's what appeared on my bank statement. Okay, so I'm getting rid of what I did is I flagged everything, and then I'm unchecking. So now all I have left checked off are August deposits, and I can check this against the bank line that it's $24,260. Other credits, this is the donation and grant money that I said I was putting into the bank. Well, that's not this statement. That'll be next statement. These are my checks, and I want to do the same with my checks. You would go through them one by one and check them. I am doing this, and I'm just basically unchecking anything that isn't August because I know I did this ahead of time and I know this is going to balance. But you'll be looking at your sheet and checking them out. Okay. Okay, I'm down to $21 a difference. Let's say I didn't know what that 21 was right now. I've done all this work and I'm off by 21 and I can't figure it out. And I remember, oh, I have to make a journal entry for the bank expense. I could save this, get out of Procare, make my journal entry, and then come back in and go to Functions, Reconcile Bank Accounts, pick my bank account, and you'll notice all of these numbers slug back in. I go next. This is sitting here waiting for me. And what I have is this is that journal entry that I'd made ahead of time, which happens to be 2133. If I were to reconcile now, it would not let me. So I'm going to just click it. I'm now balanced. The difference is 0. I can click on reconcile, finalize it by, click on that, okay. I have one chance to print the bank reconciliation statement, which is basically the same thing you have in your hand from the bank statement, but you may want to do that. And I could say yes to print the reconciliation or no. That's all there is to a reconcile. If you ever have some stuff that is from prior periods that you want to flag as having been reconciled without going through this process, you can click on your account, go down here to the edit register instead, and then you can flag or unflag existing items. Again, none of this changes your book balance. It's just that if I were to unflag these, for instance, the next time I go to reconcile, these would appear as unreconciled. So the flags are really just a way to neaten up the view when you actually do reconcile something. Reconciliation for the account is incomplete. Yeah, that's because I started a fake one. Cancel. Okay. The last thing I want to do in expense and ledger is you have two other possibilities for when you write a check. You might be doing a check. Let me go to a vendor where I don't have much in here. Valley Insurance Company. And I still have my defaults. Okay, I know I'm going to write them let's just do this just for one school. And let me go to a different vendor here. Sam's. I might do 3 different things at Sam's. I'm either going to write a check, in which case you've already seen that. I might have a debit card that goes against that checking account. It's still basically going to be treated as a check, except on your bank statement, it's going to say it was a direct withdrawal. What I could do to keep those clear in my mind is use a number that you're going to use every time for a debit card. And then when you look at your reconciliation or you see this, you'll know that, oh, I used my debit card and it was my debit card that went against that account. So the debit cards are pretty simple. If you use a credit card, it's a little bit different. And what I've done ahead of time, let me make this only the current school. What I've done ahead of time is I've made a bank account that is a credit card. So normally you might think of a credit card as being a liability. However, a credit card is really also a source of funds that usually has a negative balance. And so we're going to treat it as a Visa card contra account. And I'll show you how to set that up in configuration in about 3 minutes. And let's just post to this account and say we bought something. Let's see, payroll, school supplies, and I got $555 in school supplies. Since it's the Visa account, the check number doesn't matter, and you would be able to reconcile this since it's, quote, a checkbook. You'd be able to reconcile your bank statement as you'd pick this account because you'd be treating it as a bank account. And I would just post the check, okay? So the way all of these underlying things are set up is in configuration, and that's in Procare Home. You go to configuration, system. For expenses and ledger, there's 1 or 2 pieces up in here, locations and users, regions and schools. And if I set the options at the school, I have my accrual type. This is how you want your expenses to be reported. Accrual is the second I write the check, I have the expense and I've got an account payable. Most of you are on cash basis. The second you write the check, it's an expense and you never post and print checks later. If you did post and print check later, the expense would not occur until the date of the print on the check. So that's this cash accrual thing. In terms of expenses and ledger, this is where a lot of the filters have come from. Default filter, you're probably going to leave as just the visible vendors. And you're going to have all the exposure to vendors and is going to be basically to everybody unless you do something differently. The post date range limit is how far back and forward you can post a check, and you can loosen this, you can tighten it. I could say 3 months. So in other words, I wouldn't be able to post a check more than 3 months forward or 3 months back. The bulk of the expense and ledger is going to be in here. In family accounting, chart of accounts is where, and I'm just double clicking on this quickly. I've got the globe. You're going to have 2 different things in Procare in configuration. You're going to have items with a globe, which means they're for all schools in the region, and items with a school, which means just the school you are currently on. Again, if you have multiple schools, you have to pay attention to it. For those of you who don't, the only thing to remember is when you do introduce something on these global accounts, sometimes you have to click on Expose to All. And I'll point that out as we hit one of those screens. So let's say I wanted to make a new credit card account. I'm in my assets in my chart of accounts. And what I had done to do the Visa, let's do American Express. I'm going to make a GL number up. If it's a duplicate, Procare will let you know. And I'm going to do American Express. And I'm just putting contra on these so I don't get worried when I look at a balance sheet and I see a negative asset. I'll know what that's about. And I'm going to leave it active. I'm going to save. So now I've made a general ledger asset. I'm going to exit. When I wanted to add, by the way, my food expense, I'd also gone into here when I did the balloon expense right before this started. I went into expenses. I debated about whether it's an operational or other. I decided operational, and I just went ahead and I did the same thing. I put balloon in here, expense. Okay. So once I have this new account in my chart of accounts, I'm going to have to declare that a bank account. I'm going to double click on here, and I want to add that American Express card that I just did a minute ago. Oh, let's see. American Express contra account. I don't have a last check number. If I'm going to be using it out of expense and ledger, I need to make it a checkbook, even though it isn't, but that's how in expenses and ledger I'm writing things against it. So I say it's a checkbook, I save it, I exit. I now have my contra account ready, and I'll show you how to pay that contra account off as soon as we go back in. That's how to add a credit card. Account assignments is a one-time setup. You basically have to tell Procare what is accounts receivable, what is profit and loss when the books are closed, what is accounts payable, and what is payroll payable. General ledger dates, when you go to run a report, so you don't have to enter these constantly, you can just auto-populate them. So I'm going to double-click on here, and I've got all my 2014s in. And what I want to do is put in 2015, so I'm going to click on autofill. 2015, click continue, and it's added all my 2015 dates here. So I don't have to type in the year and so on. I can save and exit. If you're going to be doing budgeting, you're going to have to declare the general ledger dates ahead of time because the budgets are based on these fixed general ledger dates. In family accounting, we've gone through this in family accounting. When you have a charge credit description, that's where you're pointing it to that GL number that we did in the chart of accounts. The remaining items here are done in the family accounting webinar. And that is about it for the configuration on expenses and ledger. You also have in here under expenses and ledger a couple of minor things. This is where you set up your checkbook for the expenses. This is your beginning balance. So if you've never used expenses and ledger before in Procare, you probably are starting the company with some existing beginning balances, and maybe Doug can post the link to beginning balances. I think it's also in your materials. You double click in here. I have a beginning balance on 12/31/13. To quote close the year, let's pretend it's 2014 now. All I have to do is go down here. I click on new, and what it's going to do is take all of the transactions that started with these two numbers. It's going to add up all my revenue, all expenses, all changes, and come up with new beginning balances for the year. So I can exit, and that would be my new beginning balance. Please don't, other than the first beginning balance, don't ever edit these. If this is wrong, let's say we're now in February 2015, and you realize, oh gee, I bought a car in 2013, I forgot to put it in here. Don't edit this directly because then these won't flow. What you want to do is delete the beginning balance that you just created. Make the journal entry, go back into Procare, make the journal entry saying I just bought a car and loans went up and whatever, and then click new, and then re-roll that beginning balance so that it reflects that transaction. So only the first beginning balance should you ever be really editing. And other than that, if something is wrong when you go from here to here, you have some transaction that you're missing. Okay, and I want to delete this again because it might throw off a report if I do a report. I've got school budgeting left and general journal types. Remember when I put that change in under donations and grants? If I didn't have one, let's say I do a lot of things that affect my owner equity, I can make a new journal type of owner equity. I just save it, I'm done. Next time I go to make a journal entry, I'll have this as an additional option. Think of these as folders. What you call them doesn't really matter. It's just a way for you to organize the journal entries. Okay, we've got the beginning balances. And the last thing here is school budgeting. That could take a while to explain. So let me just say with budgeting, you're going to do a budget. Maybe you'll do a budget for the year, and then you'll do budgets for each individual month. If I had, let's say, 3 different month budgets, and then I want to say, okay, obviously January, February, March of 2015 is equal to those 3 budgets I had set up. I can click on import, and I would just say January, and I'd hold down the shift key, or the control key actually, January, February, March, and I'd say import. And whatever I had in the January, February, March budgets, I'll click import, would then sum into my first quarter 2015. Okay, that's what I'll just say about budgets. Now, let's get back to Procare and clean up a couple of loose ends. So under reports, if we look at reports right now, I'm going to go back to expense and ledger, reports, standard reports. My favorite report for general ledger and for knowing what's going on is the trial balance. There's a lot of other reports you could do. I could say, oh, let me know my expenses and all that. Everything is going to end up getting reflected in the trial balance. And the other reason I like trial balance is we could run a balance sheet, but I can't, quote, drill down into a balance sheet to see why the number changed. So I'm going to run a trial balance for, I'm going to do it for just this month. Oops. September 2014. I'm going to say OK, and I'm going to run that report. And let's see if that view is good or bad for you. That's probably worse than what I had. Let me change this view again. Okay, I think this is about as wide as I can make it for you. So what this has got on the trial balance is it's telling me that for 9/1 to 9/30, these things happened. The beginning balance is based on things that happened prior to 9/1, and the ending balance is simply the beginning plus what happened and the end. So as long as your beginning balances are right, the only thing you're really going to be wanting to know what changed is in this middle column. What I want to show you is drill down. So you remember I had written that one check. Let's go look for our expenses. And there's the balloon event for $50. And let's say I go, I don't remember. What's the balloon event? I can double click on anywhere on this line for the $50. I get a screen that's not telling me much other than it was an accounts payable. I'm going to double click right where it says total for S1, and this is the key. Everything that went into that expense line would be itemized in here. So I can see exactly what the check was and who the account vendor was. And then, again, that's the drill down notion. Let's drill down into a different item here. You'll notice my Visa card, which had existed before, had started with a $100 amount due, and now this says minus $585. I'm going to double click on it, and I'm going to double click on total for S1, and I can see there's that Sam's Wholesale. So that's why it went up. And then I've got my remaining balance here. So let's say I want to pay off that Visa card because I have to. I'm going to exit out of here, and I'm going to go back to my Visa vendor. I made the Visa card Bank of America, and I'm going to go and do a check. I'm at least going to do a transfer. I could do a check. I could. It's most likely I'm paying this out of my primary checking account, and I've set these up ahead of time. The two possible accounts are going to be, one is I'm refunding to the Visa card, and the other is I might also be paying some interest. Okay. So without remembering exactly what that total was, I'm going to just put $585. I'm going to pay $585. It's going to come out of my checking and go into the Visa. I don't need to print a check or do anything else. I'm just going to post the check and exit. Let's go back to the trial balance and see what happened. Reports, standard reports, under expense and ledger, general ledger reports trial balance. The same span of time as before. And I'm going to run it. And now you can see the amount here. I've got $30 went in of all the transactions that happened between here and here for the credit card. The net result was I overpaid, or I paid $30 more during this period than what I charged. Now my balance is only 70. I still owe 70 because I started out with 100. I netted out to pay 30, and here's the 70. So again, if that's confusing, I can double click on that 30, double click on here, and here's where I can see how I got to that 30. And I think that's bigger on your screen than mine. So I had a $555 outbound, and then I did a check from my Visa. That was $585. That's the $30, and the rest is just history. That's it. It is what it has to be. Okay. So the trial balance to me is one of the most useful reports you can run, and you can double click on most anything and get the detail. Undeposited payments is the difference. If I were to write a check right now, and if a family were to pay me a check right now and I didn't deposit it, this number, let's say it was $100, would say $100 had in undeposited had occurred. And then when I deposit the check, this would say 0 again if I were to rerun it, and this would be up by 100. So the undeposited checks are nothing other than a different asset because we don't know where you're putting that money yet. So it sits in undeposited accounts. All right. So some other really useful reports are, you've seen trial balance go back and forth. We've paid the credit card. The trial balance drill down, like I said, that's a big one. And these pieces, the bank account register, you can see what's going on with your bank account at any point in time. The balance sheet is going to be very much the same as what you're getting in the trial balance. The difference is you can't drill down on it. The income statement, again, is the bottom piece of the trial balance, but you can't drill down on it. So if I were to run, let's say, the balance sheet here as an example, and let's just run it for the year or whatever I find. Let's do September again. September 2014. Here's my Visa card. Same numbers, but I really don't get very far with it. I can only go down a level on it. So if you want to investigate things, the best report is the trial balance. The other things you have in expenses and ledger specifically is you can do a check summary by vendors, log sheet information. If you are using budgets, you could compare what actually happened to your budget line by line, and that's basically the entire budgeting process. And let's see what else we have here. That was configuring the budgets. I guess I'm going to stop this webinar right now. I'm going to stop the recording.